Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30, cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow. No, no, no. No, no, no. Cause I'm leaving in the morning and I must see you again. We'll have one more night together till the morning brings my train and I must go. No, no, no. No, no, no. And I don't know if I'm ever coming home. Take the last train to Foxville. I'll be waiting at the station. We'll have time for coffee-related kisses and a bit of conversation. No, no, no. No, no, no. Take the last train to Clarksville. Now I must hang up the phone. I can hear you in this noisy railroad station. All alone I'm feeling low. No, no, no. No, no, no. And I don't know if I'm ever coming home. Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30, cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow. No, no, no. No, no, no. And I don't know if I'm ever coming home. Take the last train to Clarksville.
That, of course, was Last Train to Clarksville, a song that was released in August of 1966, a few weeks before the Monkees TV show debuted, and it already sold several 100,000 copies when the Monkees TV show hit the airwaves of NBC. I'm the amazing mystery DJ, and our guest in the studio is Eric Lefcowitz. You may have read his article on the Monkees in the May 4th issue of BAM magazine. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Tell us about the Monkees.
Oh, about the Monkees? I guess they're just about the greatest prefabricated group that's ever come along. The fact that they were manufactured and got together and somehow managed to turn out all right is probably one of the great scoops of all time in rock history, and that's what's pretty much attracted me to the group in the first place, to write about them.
And tonight we'll be playing interviews with three members of the Monkees, the exception being Mike Nesmith.
Yes, Nesmith refused to be interviewed. I guess he's involved in more intellectual projects now, such as rock videos.
Yeah, I believe he might have another show on NBC soon. He's working on a TV special called Elephant Parts.
Yes, Michael Nesmith and Television Parts.
And yes, I guess that's based on a rock video he had won a Grammy for. Didn't he win the first Grammy for a rock video?
First recording artist to win a video Grammy.
Of course, I think the reason that there's been a resurgence of interest in the Monkees is that lately rock videos, of course, have become very popular, and most people associate the Monkees with the first experience they had seeing rock and video combined.
And that's true. Actually, of course, they weren't on video. They were filmed in film, but the concept of putting music on television and trying to promote the records through television, it was certainly one of the first times it was pulled off, and probably the up to MTV, the most successful venture so far. The first quote we're going to listen to here is Peter Tork, and I asked him whether he knew from the start whether the Monkees was going to blow up to be the thing that it was, and if he knew from the start also what exactly the concept meant.
Yeah. And did I know how big a success it was going to be? And the answer to that is yes, too, because they told me that, what the idea of it was. The concept was that if it, records, a TV show, concert performances, all of that, and the goal was essentially what you saw. What happened was the goal. Nobody was taken by surprise. I wasn't taken by surprise by the magnitude of the project.
Mm-hmm.
I was, if it went at all, it was going to go that big. Now, as it turns out, there was problem figuring out whether it was going to go at all, but it wound up going.
Though you've played at love and lost, and sorrows turned your heart to frost, I will melt your heart again. Remember the feeling as a child when you woke up and morning smiled. This time you felt like you did then. There's just no percentage in remembering the past. It's time you learn to live again at last. Come with me, leave yesterday behind, and take a giant step outside your mind. Stare at me in disbelief, say for you there's no relief, but I swear I'll prove you wrong. Don't sit in your lonely room, just staring back in silent gloom. That's not where you belong. Come with me, I'll take you where the taste of life is real. Yes, every day holds wonders to be seen. Yesterday with me, and take a giant step outside your mind. Take a giant step outside your mind. From the start, she said she'd never hurt me, but then she turned around and broke my heart. Why am I standing here, missing her and wishing she were here? Hey! She only did me wrong. Hey! I'm better off alone. She devoured all my sweet love, took all I had and then she fed me dirt. She laughed when I was crying. It was such a joke to see the way it hurt. Why am I standing here, missing her and wishing she were here? Hey! She only did me wrong. Hey! I'm better off alone. And now I know just why she keeps me hanging round. She needs someone to walk on. don't touch the ground.
Don't touch the ground.
But I love her.
Love her.
I need her.
Need her.
I want her.
Want her.
Yeah, she.
And that was She by the Monkees.
Yeah, She was off the second album. It's a real headbanger tune, as you can tell. From the start, the Monkees were really always wrapped around in controversy. When it first started out, people were calling them Beatle clones from the start, and except for Bob Rafelson, who was one of the producers, who actually told me that he wasn't influenced by the Monkees. He came up with the idea about 6 or 7 years before the Beatles. But anyway, besides that, a lot of people were...
Despite that, everybody else on the planet does seem to feel that the Monkees TV show copied the first 2 Beatle movies.
Certainly, and that's why there was a lot of industry envy. Many of the people who I interviewed went on to tell me that they thought that if the Monkees hadn't come along, perhaps another group would have come along and done the same thing. Perhaps not with as much taste, but someone else probably would have put it together. And I asked Bert Schneider what the television network itself, NBC, thought from the start, and this was his answer.
I don't think anybody was really too thrilled about it. I mean, the network was never thrilled about it, except that it worked. And who wants to fight? And no one's going to argue with that. And remember, the records were coming out on RCA, which was, another division. RCA and NBC were, it's all one company. So the network had to deal with the fact that here was this, was selling so many records that, everybody understood that they should, they were counting the money.
Right.
So, at that point, as long as someone doesn't do something really egregiously wrong, they just stayed away.
Mary, Mary, where you going to? Mary, Mary, can I go too? It's one thing I will buy you. I'd rather die than to live without you. Mary, Mary, where you going to? Mary, Mary, tell me truly, what did I do to make you leave me?
And that was I Want to Be Free by the Monkees. That was off their first album, and actually that was a bootleg version off the Monkey Shines bootleg, which is a little better than the original version, which had Davy Jones and an acoustic guitar, and they showed him running along freely on the beach. It's obvious that the Monkees were going to get the plastic label attached to them, since they were picked out of 437 people that tried out.
You know, there's one thing I never understood, Eric. If they wanted people to play the part of musicians in a TV show, why did they even worry about getting musicians in the first place?
Actually, it was just coincidental that Jones and Dolenz had any musical talent whatsoever.
Well, actually, of the four, Jones was the only one with any solo career to speak of prior to the Monkees in 1965. He had put out a solo album which had done reasonably well.
Yeah, it's funny that it may not be coincidental at all that was on the Columbia Screen Gems label. That may have been his in to the Monkees. But actually, they had all been involved with music. Tork was a folkie who had been around Greenwich Village a lot. And Nesmith was sort of a pseudo-Dylan imitator who was doing his thing. So they all had a little talent. And I think they felt that would help with the authenticity of it all. Unfortunately, Don Kirshner kind of wiped that all out, because as soon as the Monkees started getting big, he's very well known for his enormous ego, and he started taking credit for it and going to the press and saying, well, I made this music and the Monkees didn't, which was just what Rafelson and Schneider, the two producers, that was their worst nightmare, was that the fact that it would get out that the Monkees had not been making this music. They had just been doing the vocal tracks.
It's interesting that Kirshner did that. I mean, you would think that was the last thing that they would want to get out, and of course Kirshner got paid pretty well for doing it, and they fired him shortly after that, didn't they?
They did, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but right now there's a quote from Bob Rafelson, the producer, who talks about the whole idea of letting the press get a hold of the information that the Monkees weren't making the music.
And protested. So how do you counteract with the press? They'll say, well, it wasn't a question of doing it with the press. Once it got out, there was no way of stopping it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I couldn't then go to the Monkees and say, please, for God's sakes, lie and tell them to be producer on it, because these guys didn't like that music, and they thought they could do a better job than Kirshner's bunch. They at least wanted to have a shot at it. Now remember, groups as a rule, up until this time, took years of consolidation on the streets. A bass player meets a drum player. They join one group. They pick up another guitarist. They move over to another group. They fire two guys in another one until finally it gets them just like with the Beatles. And it gets consolidated over a long period of time, where a kind of harmonious sense of what the sound should be and could be is born of a lot of trial and error. And then afterwards, as you now know about the Beatles and God knows how many other groups, it wasn't all that harmonious in the group.
Right.
And Brian Epstein was doing, in effect, what we were doing, but with a slight more laissez-faire attitude.
Right.
But nonetheless, there was that kind of street trial. These guys didn't have that opportunity. And so for them to find out what kind of music they wanted to create, and who was to be the boss, say, of the group, what was the sound to it, was a bit of a jumble. And in that sense, Kirshner was right. I mean, there was a big argument about who was the lead singer, Davey or Mickey.
Right.
I exercised the voice in all of this, but it was really difficult to sort out because we were in such chaos. Imagine shooting 2 songs a week, and hopefully at one new one a week, mind you.
I thought love was only true in fairy tales, and for someone else, but not for me. Our love was out to get me. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. I thought love was more or less a given thing. Seems the more I gave, the less I got. What's the use in trying? All you get is pain. When I needed sunshine, I got rain. Oh, then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Oh, then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. Yes, I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. I'm not a trace of doubt in my mind. Said I'm a believer. Said I'm a believer. I'm a believer.
I'm a Believer, one of the Monkees' 3 #1 hits in their short-lived career.
Actually, that one was their biggest. It sold 10 million copies worldwide and rode the charts for about 3.5 months.
Prefab or not, with 10 million in sales, I guess they did rival the Beatles, at least there.
Yes, in fact, their first album was the largest debut-selling album in terms of #1 at the charts. It was the #1 for 15 straight weeks. That was just recently broken, unfortunately, by Men at Work. Right. But until then, they held that record. And, of course, Don Kirshner had a big hand in all of this. That's why they brought him into the project. He was well known at the time for being the man with the golden ear, they said. He wasn't the actual producer, though. On that track, Jeff Berry was the producer who also wrote Sugar Sugar later with the Archies. Kirshner was more the overseer of the whole project, bringing in writers, Carole King and Neil Diamond, who obviously wrote that last track. And he also brought in the studio musicians who facetiously called themselves the Candy Store Prophets. And Glenn Campbell was, I think, one of the session players who was on a lot of these tracks. Of course, the Monkees, especially Nesmith and Torque, were very upset about this because they had seen themselves as putting their own music into the group, and Kirshner was really only interested in having Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz singing the lead tracks. And I asked Peter how he felt about Kirshner's involvement, and this is what he said.
I had projected that I was going to be a musician in a band, and when they started cranking out the records without me, I was disappointed. But I see now, as I look back, that was critical. That's the way it had to be. And a lot of things that bothered the Jesus out of me when I was in the group and shortly after I left it don't trouble me in the slightest anymore. The business about the commercial, that business about the commercial, I was mortified that the records were being made without me. I was humiliated and felt shunned and slighted, and the worst thing was that nobody seemed to notice, and I would scream and yell and rave, and they'd scratch their heads and they'd look at me and they'd go, "What is this?" And I would tell them, and they would say, No, you don't understand. You have no reason. It's the same thing as like this Joan Jett thing. Absolute incomprehension. The person himself does not understand his own experience, which is typical of a lot of what goes on today. The basic person's experience doesn't count. Why are you going through this, Peter? Because I felt lied to and I felt humiliated. But you don't have any call to feel that way. Therefore, your human feelings don't count. So, but like I said, as I look back on it now, I see that by the terms of the project, in the project's own terms, that was the way it had to be.
She knows her mind all right, your Auntie Griselda. She says she knows my kind, she might maybe so. Oh yeah, she's raised you right, your Auntie Griselda. You only know the things he wants you to know. I know she's having a fit. She doesn't like me a bit. No bird of grace ever lit on Auntie Griselda. You can't begrudge her style, your Auntie Griselda. She couldn't budge a smile and do it for free. Making fudge, your Auntie Griselda. Soap opera judging others over her tea. You look just like her, you do. I know by looking at you that you've been listening to your Auntie Griselda. Oh no, don't look at me like Auntie Griselda. It takes much more to be someone of your own. You've got to make it free from Auntie Griselda. For just like her, you'll have to make it alone. I know she's having a fit. She doesn't like me a bit. No bird of grace ever lit on Auntie Griselda. Auntie Griselda, Auntie Griselda, Auntie Griselda, Auntie Griselda, Griselda.
Mr. Davalina, Mr. Bob Davalina, Mr. Davalina, Mr. Bob Davalina.
Zilch, China Clipper calling Alameda. China Clipper calling Alameda.
Zilch, never mind the furthermore the plea is self-defense. Never mind the furthermore the plea is self-defense. Never mind the furthermore the plea is self-defense.
It is of my opinion that the people are intending. It is of my opinion that the people are intending. It is of my opinion that the people are intending. It is of my opinion that the people are intending. It is of my opinion that the people are intending. It is of my opinion. It is of my opinion. It is of my opinion. It is my opinion that the people are intending. It is my opinion that the people people are intending.
Never mind for the mother police self-defense. Never mind for the mother police self-defense. Never mind for the mother police self-defense. China clip calling Alameda. China clip calling Alameda. Never mind for the mother police self-defense. Never mind for the mother police self-defense.
That was Zilch, and I think I'm having an acid flashback to when I was 7 years old. And I bought the Headquarters album, which is the first album that the Monkees actually produced themselves and played on most of the tracks.
They're not credited as the producer, right? There's a name on the album. Hold on. Let me take a look and see this wild name that's on here that they may have made up. Produced by Douglas Farthing Hatfield.
I think he must have been a real person because he has a song that he wrote on that album. I'm not sure which track it is, but who knows where he is now. Hopefully he's listening today if you are. Hello.
Most likely he is.
Yes. At this point, the Monkees could afford to actually make their own music, and some people may have said that their music took a dip after they got rid of Kirshner, and the sales certainly may have proved that. Their second album, More of the Monkees, sold 5 million copies, and Headquarters only sold 2.5 million, so I guess the word had gotten out at that point.
Headquarters was released during 1967, during the second year of the 2 years that the Monkee Show played on TV?
No, this is probably towards the end of the first season, and possibly during reruns or something. That was...
So it was 67 toward the end of the first season?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And at this point, the Monkees, at least in their 8 or 9 months of existence, had
put out 3 albums in that,
three albums
in that time? Wow.
and a single, and certainly they had outsold all the competition and the manufacturing and everything involved. They were planning a tour at this point. It was quite a success, and Bert Schneider told me, one of the producers, Bert Schneider, told me that at this point the Monkees' egos sort of exploded, and then it's easy to see why. They were nobodies, and suddenly here they are, television stars being mobbed everywhere they go. And so I talked to Mr. Schneider and asked him what he tried to do to keep these guys in line and try to keep the press in line too, who was still, the press was lambasting them every chance they got.
Well, I would say that there was that at least insofar as I was concerned, I had a lot of desire to manage the way in which the press got a hold of them. Yeah, I was certainly aware that there was a balance. You know, there was it's like walking a tightrope all the time. You know, because on the one hand, we want to encourage everybody to be as creative, inventive. Don't lose your personalities. That's why you got the job to begin with. It's because of who you are. So don't back off of that. And at the same time, try and keep something manageable that doesn't end up with a phone call that says you're canceled. All right. So there's, you're walking that line. You've got, industrial America on the one hand and rebellion on the other, and and what we stand for is the rebellion, or what the show does, and what we do. But at the same time, we're dealing within the real world. So I was very personally desirous of manipulating the situation so that we wouldn't get our heads chopped off. And I put a lot of pressure on the guys to be very careful, and that there were lines not to go past.
Mm-hmm. And eventually those barriers started to come down, or
yeah, sure. The more solidly successful they became, the safer it was to be more what would seem to be more outrageous in terms of attitudes. And sure, Peter. I think Peter felt that most in politics. Peter felt that much more strongly than anyone else because he really was the first of the four to manifest any attitude about being against the war. But he wasn't very far ahead of anybody.
She's a wonderful lady and and she's mine, oh mine. And there doesn't seem a way that she won't come and lose my mind. It's too easy humming songs to a girl in yellow dress. It's been a long time since the party, and the room is in a mess. The four kings of EMI are sitting stately on the floor. There are birds out on the sidewalk and a ballet at the door. He reminds me of a penguin with few and plaster hair. There's talcum powder on the ladder, and the birthday boy is there. Why don't you cut your hair? Why don't you live up there? Why don't you do what I do? See what I feel when I care. Now they've darkened all the windows and the seats in Northernite. I've been waiting for an hour, I can't find a place to hide. The being known as Wonder Girl is speaking, I believe. It's not easy trying to tell her that I shortly have to leave. Why don't you yell me? Why don't you stop and see? Why don't you hate who I hate, kill who I kill to be free?
trouble, she's so fine. So fine. Oh, your sister wants, sister wants, sister wants. How old you say your sister wants, sister wants, sister wants. You know you better keep an eye on her, eye on her.
That was the shortest rock star of all time, Davy Jones, doing She Hangs Out. And She Hangs Out is the song that finally got Don Kirshner sacked from the Monkees project. They were recording the A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You single. And at this time, the tensions had been building between Nesmith and Tork and Kirshner. And Kirshner just had Dolenz and Jones come in to do this track, She Hangs Out. And somehow that ended up on the B-side of the single. And everything erupted at that point, and everyone gathered together, the four Monkees, Kirshner, and the two producers, Rafelson and Schneider, and they had a meeting about who was going to take control of the music at this point. And apparently also some record company executives were at this meeting, and they said that there was no way the Monkees were going to do their own music. At this point, Mike Nesmith put his hand through the wall and said, that could have been your face, to one of the Screen Gems executives, and stormed out. And Bert Schneider decided to go with the Monkees, to go with Nesmith and Tork and let them do their own music. And Don Kirshner disappeared, only to come back and do the great Sugar Sugar a few years later. I asked Peter how he felt about this whole controversy and whether it caused a rift between the band, since Nesmith and Tork were the two members who were most upset about not making the music. And this is what he said.
It didn't cause a rift, in the sense that when the time came, Bert asked all of us if we wanted to make our record, and we all four said yes. And that's why Bert went ahead and made the changes in the plans, and why he suffered the business. You know, I mean, another guy would have, this is what I like Bert for, another guy would have said, I can't let you do it, boys. Kirshner would sue us, and we, you know, would take us to court, and we would. But Bert doesn't mind a fight, particularly a lot. If you know, he won't be threatened, he won't be bludgeoned, and if he wants to do it, he will go ahead and do it. And he wanted us to want to do this. This is what I love Bert for. He wanted us to want to do it, and while he wouldn't goad us, he certainly didn't deny us the effort. When we wanted to do it, he went ahead and arranged that it be done, and it just absolutely blew Kirshner out of the water. Kirshner thereupon left the Monkees and took up a project that was somewhat less threatening. The Monkees being not plastic enough for Don Kirshner, he subsequently went straight to the Archies, who were not going to give him any S dash, as you will print, if you print this at all.
Now, you look back on it and you say, you know, the commercial aspects don't bother you as much. Looking back on Kirshner, how do you feel about him? And
Kirshner was Kirshner. I have nothing to say for or against him. He definitely had his time, and for a time he was probably the best moneymaker. He probably was. He probably holds the record for as being the best moneymaker over the longest period for a long, long time, in terms of just being able to say, that'll sell, that won't, that'll sell, that won't. What Donnie didn't know was that if he could have gone right on being the same guy he was, doing the same things he did, having the same guys be our producer, all we wanted to do was be the musicians in the chairs. And if he had been willing to put up with us being the musicians in the chairs, he could have gone right on being the Monkees' musical overseer, you know, forever and ever. But for some reason, and I don't to this date know why exactly, but for some reason he saw that, you know, obviously it was a challenge, because once he says no and we say yes, then it's a challenge. But before that point, why he had to say no and insist that it be a challenge is something I don't understand. Because Donnie could have gone right on being the Monkees guy forever, you know, as long as there was a Monkees project. But for some reason, the fact that we wanted to be in the chairs was so threatening to him that he absolutely refused to allow it to happen. It was going to be, you know, over his dead body, and while it didn't quite come to that, it certainly did wind up in his dissociating from the Columbia Screen Gems project.
Was there a scene or something where Nesmith put his fist through the wall?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was. But I don't remember too much about that scene.
mark in society. You're using all the tricks that you used on me. You're reading all them high-fashion magazines. The clothes you're wearing, girl, are causing public scenes. I said, I'm not your stepping stone. I'm not your stepping stone. Not your stepping stone. Not your stepping stone. When I first met you, girl, you didn't have no shoes. But now you're walking around like your front page news. You've been awful careful about the friends you choose. But you won't find my name in your book of who's who's. I said, I'm not your stepping stone. Oh, girl, not me. I'm not your stepping stone. Not your stepping stone. I'm not your stepping stone. 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 No, girl, not your stepping stone. 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 Hey, fellas, this is not gonna work out. The local rock group down the street is trying hard to learn their song. Serenade the weekend squire who just came out to mow his lawn. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Charcoal burning everywhere. Rows of houses that are all the same, and no one seems to care. See, Mrs. Gray, she's proud today because the roses are in bloom. Mr. Green, he's so serene, he's got a TV in every room. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Here in status symbol land. Mothers complain about how hard life is, and the kids just don't understand. Creature comfort goes, they only know my soul and make it hard for me to see. Thoughts all seem to stray to places far away. I need a change of scenery. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Charcoal burning everywhere. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Here in status symbol land. Another
That's Pleasant Valley Sunday by the Monkees. That was off their fourth album, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited, considered by many Monkee aficionados as their best album. And that song was a hit during the summer of '67, the wonderful summer of '67. And as you can tell, the Monkees are maturing at this point. Nesmith was playing guitar on that track. Torque was playing, he was on the piano track, and their voices are all over the place, and they even had feedback at the end. I mean, they were with it now. Unfortunately, older kids, on the other hand, didn't consider them with it, and this is where the Monkees were getting in trouble. They were really worried that about what the older kids thought about them. The Monkees just weren't cool enough for the kids who were tuning in and dropping out and all that. So that caused the Monkees to start worrying about what they should be doing with their fame and fortune. And I talked to Bob Rafelson about this, and here's what he said about what was going on at this point in the Monkees' career.
Furthermore, there was the tremendous disillusion of, now that the word had gotten out, that the Monkees were not responsible for their music. The older kids said, fuck the Monkees, let my little sister watch them. But I want to listen to Jim Morrison. I want to listen to the Stones. I want to listen to the Rebels, not air-side Monkee Rebels. And I think that they took that to task. They know that. And they were tired of being bubblegum. They weren't bubblegum types as individuals. Whatever you might think of them, each one of these guys has managed in their own right, although I'm not up to date on all of them, to sustain pretty interesting lives. And if you look at their contemporaries in music, you find out where they are. So there was a lot of fighting about this issue of bubblegum.
Oh, I could hide neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings. The 6 o'clock alarm would never ring, but it rings and I rise, wipe the sleep out of my eyes. My shaven razor's cold and it stings. Cheer up, sleepy Jean, oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? You once thought of me as a white knight on his steed. Now you know how happy I can be. Oh, and our good time starts and ends without $1 to spend. But how much, baby, do we really need? Cheer up, sleepy Jean, oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? Cheer up, sleepy Jean, oh, what can it mean
gone. Maybe we make it a duet?
No.
If you get lost, I'll be a single. Here I come,
Mickey.
walking down the street. I get the funniest looks from all the people I meet.
Mickey.
Hi, I'm a monkey.
Mickey.
And you're listening to KALX, University of California Radio in Berkeley. And if you've been listening for a while, you've noticed that we've had a special on the Monkees, and the voice that's done most of the talking is a journalist named Eric Lefcowitz, whose article on the Monkees you may have read in the May 4th issue of BAM magazine. And that last song we heard by the Monkees, Daydream Believer, was the Beatles', the Monkees' fifth single, and their final mega hit, as I would describe it.
And they had 3 number ones, and that was the last one. I think they had one hit afterwards with Valerie, top 5.
Well, that was a big hit, but Daydream Believer sold zillions.
Yeah.
In fact, their first 5 singles all did.
At this point, the show was going off the air, so it was significant. They had this one last shot in the arm. After 2 seasons and 56 episodes, they decided to call it quits, or they were canceled. Schneider told me they put him up against Gunsmoke the second season, so their ratings were down, but they weren't low enough to actually cancel the show.
One interesting thing that we haven't mentioned is that during the 2 years that the show aired on NBC, a lot of cities never saw it or only saw either the first year or the second year because it was during the Vietnam War, and the show was considered kind of anti-establishment, and there were a lot of stations that were afraid to carry the Monkees, so there were some cities where it wasn't seen until 15 years later in reruns.
Yeah, you may not remember at the time, if you were watching it and you were young, that there were these political jokes, but I got up early and watched the show recently on Channel 44. It's on at 6 in the morning, and I was watching an episode, and there was a scene when they were all playing dominoes, and Mickey pushes a domino down, and all these dominoes fall, and Peter turns to Mike and says, "What's this?" And Mike goes, "Southeast Asia." So they had their little political jokes that were in there. And really at this point, towards the second season, they were getting a little looser. They were pretty satiated with their fame. They cut the laugh track off the show in the second season, and Mickey Dolenz directed one of the shows, and they had Frank Zappa on a show, and they were getting pretty wild. So it was pretty obvious the show was going to wind down, and they finally decided to call it quits. And
it was certainly by far the most freeform show on television at the time. It was real daring in that respect for commercial television. Still would be if it was on today. Why was it canceled? Whose decision was it?
Rafelson and Schneider told me recently when I interviewed them that actually they decided to take the show off the air because they felt they had done it all, that they were running dry at that point, and there really wasn't much else to do with it, and they figured the band would go on touring and making specials. And actually that's why they made the movie Head, which we'll hear Rafelson talk about in a second. It was sort of an end project to sum up the Monkees, and it was radically different. If anyone's seen it, they know it's radically different than the show itself. It was co-written by Jack Nicholson with Bob Rafelson, and
Jack Nicholson wasn't famous at the time, was he? He was sort of unknown, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was fairly unknown. In fact, his connection with Rafelson really worked out because Rafelson and Schneider went on to form BBS Productions after the Monkees. Their first movie was Head, and their second movie was Easy Rider. And Rafelson himself went on to direct
5 Easy Pieces.
Right.
With Nicholson was a smash in that.
So that certainly helped out. And Peter Tork said in his interview that if it hadn't been for Jack Nicholson on the set of Head, everything would have just blown up at that point because they were all really going in their separate directions. But I asked Rafelson about the movie Head, and he's very proud of it, as are all the Monkees. And he talked about how at the time when Head came out, the Monkees weren't really popular at all with the public. And this is what he has to say about Head.
In fact, when the theater opened the first night down in the village, people came storming out and demanded their money back because they found out the Monkees were in the picture. So, in fact, what I felt about the movie was, let this movie be our just reward for having done everything else. If we find an audience, let it be an audience that might appreciate a more sophisticated understanding of rock and roll and what we had all been through. And I had no idea that it was blocked, but I certainly knew that it was not going to be let's clamor for the Monkees and bring the 7-year-olds, because you don't have them starting off committing suicide in the movie if that's what you want to accomplish. The movie separates itself entirely stylistically from the television show. And Bert kept saying, look, all your life you've talked about wanting to make a movie, but God's sakes, why do you want to make the Monkees? I said, because it's just an incredible thing you've all been through. Let's put it on film.
And that was the Porpoise song, which is the main theme song of the movie Head. And after Head, the last act of the Monkees was to make a special 33 1/3 revolutions per monkey, which was an hour-long special they made, which unfortunately NBC put up against the Oscars.
They also never repeated the show.
Never. In
Despite
fact,
the excellence of one of the best rock shows that's ever been broadcast on television, they had on Julie Driscoll, Brian Auger, and the Trinity, who were phenomenal and really hot in England at that time. Peter Tork did a thing where he played an instrument that was kind of weird, sort of a synthesizer-type instrument. He did an instrumental solo on it, and it was very impressive. It was really a terrific show, and it never ran again.
Yeah, Peter quit right after that, and he had a little trouble after this. He was pretty burnt out at this time. He was hanging out a lot with Jimi Hendrix. Matter of fact, we forgot to mention that Jimi Hendrix's first tour of the United States was opening up for the Monkees.
And getting booed off the stage by little teeny boppers.
Although Mickey Dolenz, I asked him about the incident. I don't know if he remembers it well or not, but he seemed to say that Hendrix was well received, but he got a hit record off the tour. And they decided to let him go and tour on his own at that point. At least that's what Mickey Dolenz has to say about it. But the special was the last thing that all four Monkees did together. The three Monkees carried on for a while, and they made a few albums, none of which I've even listened to. I don't know why. I just never bothered with it. I guess there were a few good songs after that.
Well, Mike Nesmith was the only one who had success as a singer-songwriter after that. Of course, he wrote Different Drum for the Stone Ponies, a group that featured Linda Ronstadt on lead vocals. And the following year, 1968, he had a hit with a band called the First National... What was the name of that band?
First National Band, I think.
And the song was called Joanne, country tune, and he did real well with that. I think it was about a top 20 hit.
And gradually, they just faded out, and there was really nothing left of them. And in the early 70s, it wasn't very hip to like the Monkees anymore.
I think during the 70s, Jones and Dolenz got together with their primary songwriters, Boyce and Hart, who wrote the theme from the Monkees and Last Train to Clarksville, and did a tour sort of as a Monkees reunion without Michael and Peter.
Yeah, they toured American theme parks, Great America, and sort of like that movie Spinal Tap, if you've all seen that. They carried on for a while, and but interestingly enough, there have been revivals of the Monkees, one in England and one in Japan. These were in the late 70s and the early 80s, and they've been fairly massive revivals, though. The records have gone top 10, and Peter Tork and Davy Jones separately have gone over and toured Japan. And I asked Peter, why does he think that the Monkees carries on, and why people think so fondly back on the show?
The reason that the Monkees meant so much to so many people, I think, is because without threatening them, there seemed to be an element of this is the way things could be. It's a phony in that part of the implication is this is the way it could be except for real life. But at the same time, there is this offer that people can get together and it was part of the 60s, all you need is love kind of notion. And I think that, every era, some people are still stuck in the 30s.
Right.
And there's going to be people stuck in the 60s for the rest of their lives.
Bert put it pretty well. I thought he said that instead of father knows best, the kids know best.
The kids know best?
Yes,